Good afternoon, folks, and welcome again to the Veterans Forum. As you know, this program is being conducted throughout the country at all of the community-level television stations who will, in cooperation with the Library of Congress, put the studio time and talent to help record the veterans' stories as it was made and lived by them. Our program is called the Veterans Forum. The studio today, we're coming to you from Bedford, New Hampshire. Our guest today, like all the other guys, has had a lot of fun, has lived a good life, and is well beyond 21. Most of the words you'll hear are acceptable. What I'd like to do, though, first, is to ask you people, if you haven't seen the show, but are interested, at the end we'll give you an address so that you too can come and share your experiences with us. The bottom line, very simply, we're fighting the clock and the calendar with respect to guys like me and Jack who are well down the road, because every day that I read the newspaper obituaries, it says he or she was a veteran of some war, period. It doesn't say a darn thing about who he was, what he or she did, and how it affected their life and livelihood. And that's what we're trying to do, is have the history that was made retold by the people who made it without any frills. If you can do that and would like to do it, please. We need you, and we want to make darn sure that your story is part of the mosaic. If you haven't seen the show before, one statistic that I've been given at the outset back in, 2002, at one time in World War II, as an example, there were some 16 million guys and gals serving throughout the world, each one having their own little thing to do. Well, time has gone by, and so has a lot of the people. The last input I had about 2 years ago, statistically, they estimate there's maybe 1.5 million to 2 million in the old World War II guys left. They're dying at the rate, though, of about anywhere from 12 to 1,500 a day. We're a walking endangered species, I guess. But before it's too late and you can't tell your story, nobody else will if you don't. So please, if you can, come and do it. One thing I should like to do, I heard about this the other day. I think it's most important. Listen carefully. To any guy who was a veteran or gal, or their family or friends who know of veterans who may need help in any capacity, there's a very new system going, somewhat like 911, or this one, 211. It'll get you in touch with a counseling service, and I can't read them all, but it covers everything from clothing and thrift shops, customer service, down to wellness programs, property handling, parenting, any types of problems you may have physically or mentally. Remember that number and pass it on to every guy and gal that you know who needs it. 211. Okay. Now, for today, we have a young fellow, used to be, who has a rather interesting story, and some of the stuff that you see on the table will get talked to later. I'm going to hold this up, and if you will, that's Jack. I'll now turn to Jack and ask him to introduce himself, spell your last name, give us your branch of service, dates of service, more important, where you're living now. Can and will you, sir? Welcome.
I'm Jack Saunders, and I was fortunate enough to have an appetite for the military and the Navy when I was a young boy, partly because my father instilled in me to be self-sufficient and prepared for anything.
Okay, that's fine, but you're getting way ahead of me. Just give us your present name and address and where you live now, and then we'll flash back.
I'm Jack Saunders. I currently live in Holderness, New Hampshire, in the White Mountains.
What branches of service?
Oh, my
and the service dates.
Started in 1943, started at Kings Point. The Merchantman Academy was just formed at that time at the old Chrysler estate on Long Island Sound. And that's where my service started. I enlisted there, and my first My training was just brief, 6 weeks.
We'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
I just want to set the stage. Here you are today, and then we'll go back and see how you
Okay.
developed, all right? Where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
You don't sound like
Well, I've been around the world. My accent is
cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
Okay. Where and when? Where in Brooklyn? What time? What year?
Oh, I was born in November 15, 1922. I'm young. I'm 91 right now.
Okay. You're doing good math, huh? Math major. Now, do you have any family, brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have one brother left. He's a few years younger than I am, and he lives in very close to where Kings Point is, the Merchant Academy. He lives near Great Neck, New York. So that, and I have one sister who's older than I am. She's about 95 now.
She won't like you to say that. Good. Now, what about any other members of your family in the service? Brothers, fathers, sons?
My son was an Air Force career serviceman, and he served all over, including Thule and Greenland, and in Europe, in Germany at Wiesbaden, and he served his full 20 years and retired as an Air Force veteran.
Good. That's great. Now, let's build some history. I want to go back. How was your life growing up in Brooklyn or wherever it was? And
Well,
how did it train you, or how did you train yourself? That's we talked before.
That's interesting. Coming from an immigrant family, I was born in the States. They had just arrived from Poland, and my father was a factory worker, a garment worker, and he filled me with stories of his life before he emigrated to the States, for which he and my mother are very grateful, and they instilled a lot of patriotism in me because they compared living here to living in Europe.
Tell us about that.
What's that?
Tell us about what your father told you about living in Europe
Yes.
just before the
Well,
war.
My father's home was in Poland, and as a Polish Jew, which was common in those days and even today, they used to have riots, they called them pogroms, against the Jews, and my father saved himself and survived a couple of these pogroms, and he filled me with these stories of his survival, and not knowing any different, I assumed my life held similar challenges. So I arranged my life to be prepared for whatever comes down the road, including building myself up physically, as well as undertaking studies that would make me important and valuable to contribute to any community I happen to end up in. So physical fitness and mental fitness is what guided me. So knowing I wanted to go in that direction, I qualified for the best technical high school in Brooklyn, called Brooklyn Tech, and absorbed everything I could absorb, but taking both vocational courses that taught me how to use my hands in wood shop, machine shop, especially machine shop, because I knew how to work when I graduated high school, even though I had a scholarship to CCNY. The family needed my contributions, which I wasn't making at that time, because they insisted I devote my time.
Well, how was life growing up in your early school days? Were you in any activities, any sports or games? Or,
Yep. Well,
how was you?
My sporting life came later. because you didn't have much opportunities in Brooklyn. But to that point, I grew up in a tough part of Brooklyn called Brownsville, which was a mixed neighborhood which had Italian, Negro, and Jewish ethnicities interacting there, and it was a tough place. So sort of indirectly, I was preparing for World War II in the jungles of Brooklyn. And having survived that and training myself at Brooklyn Tech, in fact becoming a qualified machinist, so that when I graduated high school, I immediately got a job as a precision machinist in a defense plant, one of Sperry Gyroscope's early companies called Ford Instrument in Long Island City, which happened to be making naval gun control sights for the Navy, in which I eventually
So you're right in line then, yeah. Good.
So just before World War II, I was working in a defense plant, and by the way, I had a deferral through the war if I wanted it, because I was more valuable making those naval gun control sites that not too many people were skilled at than going into service. But I always wanted to be in service, so I didn't take advantage of that deferral opportunity. In fact, I did the opposite and worried my mother, and I insisted on her. I had to have her permission because I was too young.
Sign you off?
Yep, 'cause she was reluctant to do it, but she did it. And I ended up qualifying for the newly formed Merchant Marine Academy, which was part of the Maritime service. And in that sign-up, you signed up to be part of the Naval Reserve and the Maritime Merchant Marines Reserve at the same time. And I was thrown into a quick 6-week basic, which the cardinal part of it was lifeboat drill, because merchant ships and convoys were
Sitting ducks.
Didn't survive too many submarine attacks, which I suffered too.
No.
But I was lucky.
Let me interrupt.
Yeah.
Now, did you volunteer, or were you in the draft at that time? Was this strictly volunteer?
As I just said, I volunteered. I signed
Okay, I didn't
up.
hear. I'm sorry.
Oh, I could have taken advantage of the
On the deferment,
deferment because of my skilled defense work. But I chose to sign up. You had to volunteer to get into Kings Point anyway.
Okay, I didn't know. I wanted to make sure.
Volunteered. At any rate, back to my basic training, they sent us out in this lifeboat in Long Island Sound, and the coxswain said he had somebody emptying a can of gasoline on the water, and then he lit it and said, okay, now you've got opportunity to swim under that burning gas or oil.
No trial by fire then.
What? Yep.
Trial by fire.
That's right. They didn't fool around. We had to go to sea a few weeks after that, and we had to know what we're getting into.
Okay.
And they sent us to sea after 6 weeks of, boot camp-like stuff. But the main thing was concentrating on if you were a deck officer, you concentrated on navigation and seamanship. If you were an engineer like me, you concentrated on engineering. We had a training ship called the Emery Rice, which was coal-fired. We had to learn to shovel coal
Be a
into
stoker,
coal-fired boilers, and that's how we started. But my first ship wasn't much improved over that. It was a Liberty ship, which had a 3-legged steam reciprocating engine. You didn't have to fuel it with coal, but it was fueled with oil. It had steam boilers. But one of my jobs as a cadet at sea for serious, because we were carrying 10,000 tons of blockbusters for North Africa for our Air Force to fight Rommel. Montgomery was engaged with Rommel at the time in Egypt, and they were winning. And we had to get our bombs out there. So my little Liberty ship was carrying 10,000 tons of blockbusters. It didn't matter to me. If we got hit, the deck guys could get blown off, but being in the black gang,
You went down
no
with the
way to
ship.
go.
I
You
know.
go down. But at 18, I was focused on doing my job and learning. I was looking ahead to when the war was over, and I wanted to be an engineer.
Okay. Now
At
going
any
back,
rate,
let me cut
yeah.
in. You raised the thing. When you said you were in the lifeboat and the guy lit the gas, how did you, quote, take the test? Do you have to jump out of
Yeah, you jump out.
with or without a life jacket?
That's right. You don't swim well with a life jacket.
Okay.
But-
and then what? How did you pass?
Well, I was a pretty good swimmer. You know, always wanting to be in the Navy. I was aiming for Annapolis.
Good.
I was in school, so I was pretty good in the water. So we just jumped at a place before the burning oil. We jump off and then swim underneath it. You hold your breath.
And what happens if you couldn't hold enough breath?
Then you
You burnt?
come up in a hot place.
No, seriously, did they have any way of coming in to save you?
You could peel off if you couldn't do it. You know, you'd peel off to the side where it wasn't burning.
No, thanks. I'm a coward.
Anyway,
Go ahead.
they didn't have time for niceties.
Okay.
But and we were getting into a service, as I mentioned to you, and I want to mention to whoever's listening to this, I'd like to quiz you, which service do you think had the highest casualty rate, plus was indispensable to winning the war? Most people won't guess it. I'll answer it for you. It was the Merchant Marine. And I personally lived it. And I served when we served our cadet duty out on the ships for up to a year or more, depending on where luck took you. When we got back to Kings Point to finish our program and then become commissioned and licensed officers, we were at sea. And I experienced it firsthand because everything went fine until we came off the coast of Gibraltar, heading for Morocco and Casablanca, where we were going to deliver our bombs. The German subs attacked us at night, and being in the Naval Reserve, the cadets were on what's called the gun control
Gun crew, yeah.
The merchant vessels, our Liberty ship, had gun positions of a 5-inch 40 in the bow, and a bunch of anti-aircraft gun, Orlican 20-millimeter guns that I was assigned to. So when the general quarters was sounded, I had to go to my station and man that gun. It was night, and we really couldn't see much. I fired a few bursts when we saw some indication of an enemy, but I was lucky. They sunk a couple, but obviously I'm here, and our ship lucked out. But I saw, and then when I got back after serving as a cadet on ships and got back to the advanced program, I found out that many of our classmates were killed.
They bought the farm.
And so, at any rate, after Gibraltar, I went to Casablanca, and it was dangerous for someone in uniform to go into the Casbah because it was Spanish and French, and the Moroccans didn't like Americans. But I could speak a little French. I dressed up in my dungarees and had the beginning of a little mustache, and I went into the Casbah just for excitement and get experience. That was my first Uncle Sam sponsored
Tour.
overseas travel.
Yeah, in good company.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever travel alone, or were you always in convoy?
In the Navy, I traveled alone. See, my career started in the Merchant Marine. So while I was a cadet, it was always with convoys to protect us. When I got back and completed the advanced part of the program and got my Merchant Marine Engineer's license, passing the Coast Guard test, and getting my commission, I had a choice. I had two commissions, ensign in the Navy and ensign in the Maritime Academy. But because I was looking ahead to surviving the war, my ambition was to be an engineer. And if you went Navy as an engineering officer, you didn't get hands-on experience. You gave orders to the chiefs and the crewmen to do the job, but you didn't
You didn't touch the dirty parts.
That's right. I call it hands-on. But I wanted the hands-on, so I went merchant. So my first ship, when I went merchant, I graduated in March of '44 from the Merchant Marine Academy. So I went merchant, but at that time, they were having trouble. The U.S. and the Allies couldn't make enough speed reduction gears for these merchant and Navy ships because we couldn't make enough of the gears. They're very high precision, and we ran out of capacity. So some smart engineers came up with a way of reducing the speed from a turbine, which goes at 3,600 RPM, to what a propeller wants to run at without cavitating, which is about 100 RPM. So they came
That's
up
a heck
with
of a
this
reduction.
system. What?
That's a heck of a reduction.
Yeah. Well, normal reduction gears, like in your car,
Yeah.
do that job, but they couldn't make enough of them, and we needed more ships. So they came up with this turboelectric drive. And being an engineer looking forward, I said, that's what I want to do. So as a maritime ensign, they were encouraging people to learn it. So they sent me, of course at their expense and my pay, they sent me to a turboelectric training station run by General Electric Company, which is part of my future story. That's where I got interested in working for GE in the future, because I was impressed with their operation. So I went to New York State to this training center and got trained as a turboelectric marine operating engineer. And as soon as I finished that was about a month of study and training. They had a mock-up of this turboelectric system, so you knew firsthand how to do everything. Of course, my first job after that, without any help from anybody else, maybe the chief engineer, I had to stand watch, and the ship I got, which was turboelectric, was a T2 tanker, which was carrying 130 octane gas to England to fuel the
Fighters and bombers,
Spitfires
yeah.
that saved England from the Nazi bombing, and to fuel the American Air Force that ran out of England. So my first ship as a third assistant marine engineer and a maritime service ensign was this turboelectric tanker, which was shipping out of New York. So our convoy, which was protected by destroyer escorts and destroyers 30 miles out of New York City, the subs attacked us. And we lost a couple of tankers. Again, I was lucky, and we survived that. I delivered our gas at Liverpool from an offshore pumping station. They didn't want us to pull in to port. It was too dangerous. So they pumped us out. And then they sent us back to the States. And then, after figuring out, my wife just had a baby boy back at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I'm a little ahead of myself. When I got back to New York, I figured out by that time, and I always wanted to be a naval officer anyway. That was my ambition as a boy. So I went on active duty with the Navy and left the Merchant Marine.
And you transferred your commission?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had a commission in both at Kings Point. That's what was nice about it. I could have chosen to go Navy when I graduated, but for the reasons I just gave you, I went merchant. Now I'm back in the Navy for a couple of reasons. To satisfy my ambition to be a naval officer. Number two, it was safer than being a merchant officer. And I now, at any rate, while I was in the Navy, so my first ship, when I signed up for the Navy, by the way, my first duty station was at the meteorological office in New York City. I guess I was on duty on the day D-Day happened in New York City. At any rate, I put in, they had a new class of destroyers, and I was a destroyer. I love destroyers. I love submarines also, but that was the closest thing to a submarine. And I asked for this new 500 class of destroyer that they were going to see at the time, but they didn't give that to me. What I ended up with was, in effect, a surface submarine. It was called a four-piper. Those were the destroyers we gave England.
In World War II Lend-Lease stuff.
The Lend-Lease. Yeah. That's what I was assigned to. It was DD-221, the DD Simpson. It was a four-piper, but that vessel had what I wanted as a can man. I called myself a can man.
A tin can sailor.
It had torpedoes like a sub. It had depth charges, of course. It had surface guns. It had everything.
But no periscope.
What?
No periscope.
No. Exactly. Anyway, so that was my duty. My cabin was like a closet. It had a little corner sink and a bunk just enough to turn around. Fortunately, I was pretty thin, and that was my bunk. But to get into my engine room and my boiler room, guess what? It was like a submarine. I had to go through an airlock, because in those days, those four-pipers didn't have pressurized boilers with their own fans. The boiler room was pressurized. They would pressurize the whole room. To get into it, you had to go through an air hatch. If you didn't, you'd lose the pressure.
And you had to dog the damn thing down before you went the other way.
Yeah, of course. Just
you
like a
tell
sub.
them, because people don't know that.
Yeah, just like a sub. So I was like on a surface sub. So that was my duty. My duty again went back to escorting merchant convoys. It's funny. I went from being in a convoy in a merchant service to protecting them from an old destroyer. But then things changed. And my other duty with that destroyer, which was important, when they first commissioned these new aircraft carriers that saved us in the Pacific, like the Shangri-La and so on, my job on my destroyer's job was to escort these new carriers that were being shaken down to make sure everything worked, including the Navy and Marine flyers with their new aircraft. So our job, if these flyboys, hit the water, we would pick them up.
Pick them up, yeah.
Anyway, it was curious how I still had this convoy protection and also protecting carriers.
Yeah.
And so that was part of my duty. And then my destroyer was transferred to the Gulf, escorting LCSs, and that's where I learned to handle seasickness. Because the worst ship to be on is not the destroyer itself, be on an LCS, which is like a bathtub. It rolled.
Do you have any pictures of that?
What?
Do you have any pictures? Just show one if you can't.
No, I don't have a picture
okay.
of an LCS.
All right.
I have a picture of my LCS in the Pacific. I'll show you
All right.
later.
Okay. We got a program, folks.
What's that?
I just say we have a program.
Yeah. So after that duty, what goes around comes around. Everything I did in my life had a purpose. Remember I told you about my becoming a turboelectric marine engineer? Well, the Navy had the same problem the Merchant Marine had. Like that tanker I was on was not a mechanical reduction gear, it was a turboelectric. The Navy was now going into turboelectrics also, but nobody in the Navy knew
what to
how
do
to
with them. Yeah.
So they looked at my record, Merchant Marine, turboelectric, tanker, engineering experience. So they assigned me to a special commissioning group, or pre-commissioning group, for this attack transport. They were brand new.
I'll hold it up, maybe we can see it. This is about the best we can do, folks.
What that ship's duty was to carry gyrenes, the friendly name for Marines, and their landing craft. You can see the landing craft, so they could hit the beach. We would support them. We had pretty good guns, but they had bigger guns from the cruisers. So we would launch the Marines in their landing craft, support them with the guns, and then pick them back up. But this was turboelectric driven.
Now, where was that activity?
That was at Newport News.
Okay.
I'm not Newport News, Newport, Rhode Island. And this picture here shows me when, in those days, we called the engine group the Black Gang, because we would get pretty dirty and black. It had nothing to do with race. So that's me as the ensign, the engineering officer, with his Black
crew,
Gang behind him.
Yep.
And that's the ship that we went to the Pacific in. So my job for quite a few months was, we had a mock-up of the turboelectric driven.
And you were training the people.
And I was training them, so when we went to sea, we could do the job. There was no screwing around. We couldn't learn on the job. We had to be
able to do it before then.
When after we were commissioned in Rhode Island, then we headed for the canal.
When? What month or year?
This happened in '44.
Okay, and did you go? What's the word? You passaged the canal?
Yeah, we passaged
no trouble?
the canal. And that was a good experience. We got leave for a day or so when we had to wait for the locks. It was very interesting. Again, I have to thank Uncle Sam for paying for my worldwide travel.
Okay,
I took advantage of it.
And you earned it.
At any rate, we then went into the Pacific.
Did you ship into direct, or did you go into San Diego?
Oh no, we didn't have time to screw around with that. We went
Straight
right
across?
to Hawaii.
Hawaii, okay.
That was the...
Because I want to make sure we get the time right so we can get you in there.
Oh yeah. So we went to Hawaii, which was nice. I never been there before. It was like a tourist. Anyway, after Hawaii, we headed directly for the Gilbert Marshalls. Eniwetok and Tarawa, which was a bad place.
Amen.
For the Marines, really got hit hard there. But anyway, we picked up our gyrenes in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor, and then we headed for the Gilbert and Marshalls, and then after we delivered them, we went around to different islands there supporting the Marines, and finally the war was coming to an end. Then they sent us back to Hawaii to pick up some more Marines to bring back to the Pacific Theater, but the war ended while I was in Hawaii the second time. It was like July or August of '45.
Okay. Now,
But
did you ever get on to Okinawa?
yes,
No.
but after the war.
Okay.
So back to my story, when the war ended and the need for attack transports, this ship,
Mm-hmm.
the Scania that I was on, they reassigned me, again, seeing I had a engineer's license for all marine power plants, including marine diesels. Since there was no need for the attack transport, they assigned me to an LCS, which is a landing craft support. And its job, when the war was on, was to provide picket duty to surround the carrier task forces with our radar, so when the kamikazes would head for the aircraft carriers, we would pick them up first and radio in so they'd be ready for them. That was the job of these LCSs, which I have a picture of here. Here, it's kind of small, but the LCS is the little vessel. It was a 150-foot gunboat powered by 8 Gray Marine diesels.
This is too small to show up.
Yeah, it's kind of small.
There it is, right there.
But there were 8 Gray Marine diesels. There were 2 screws. There was a bull gear for each screw, and so the 4 Gray Marine diesels put its torque into this bull gear through 4 pinions, which had clutches on them. So if all 4 engines were operating, they were clutched in, and the bull gear received torque from 4 pinions, and that gear would
Drive
the prop. But what would happen at sea, we'd get water in the fuel, unavoidably through condensation or leaks. And when you get water in the ejector, the engine would shut down. So we would declutch that engine, go in, pull it and work on it, clean it up, put in new injectors or whatever, and then get it back online. Meanwhile, we were running with the other 3, but at reduced power. And that became a problem on the way home, that 10,000 miles with this little 150-foot gunboat in the Pacific. You were in a convoy. If you broke down and you held up the convoy too much, they would threaten me and say, if you don't get back online in 2 hours, you're going back to Guam. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. I had a wife and baby waiting on the West Coast. So anyway, I'd lie a little bit, and eventually I'd get it back online, and we kept up with the thing. But back to Okinawa, when I picked up my LCS, the first thing we did was head to Okinawa. This was after the casualties, but there were still remnants of leftover Japanese, and there were still problems, with the Okinawan people. So being a small vessel, we could get in and out of small harbors and support the soldiers that were there. So it was in a support capacity. After Okinawa, they sent us to Tsingtao, China. Manchuria, which wasn't that far from there. And that was another travel opportunity. We were supporting some soldiers that were there, taking over from the Japanese. And after that duty, then it got serious. There were lots
You mean
of
this has
mines.
been fun so
What?
far? This has all been fun so far?
Yep. Well,
Okay.
I've been lucky. I was in the thick of things, but God was with me.
Amen.
I never got wounded. And the vessels I were on survived. And I was learning all the time, taking advantage of everything. Problems became
Challenge.
learning
Yeah.
opportunities. So at any rate, they were clearing the channels in Korea to bring in more troops to support the Koreans. And so our job, after the minesweepers, the Navy minesweepers, cut the mines and picked them up, just to make sure they sent us in to verify that there were no stragglers
mistakes.
or leftovers. And that's where I first experienced the tremendous tides in that part of the world. It's like, 40-foot tides.
Yep.
So you had to be careful where you tied up so you don't end up being grounded. But I pulled into Korea, and Mokpo was the town, and that's where I picked up these two souvenirs.
Uh-huh.
I
I'm going to
didn't-
hold them up so people.
Yeah.
It's not quite an M1, folks,
No, but
or a carbine,
fortunately, it's a cheap Japanese rifle.
but they were effective.
Yes?
Bayonet goes on here, and there's
Yep.
a spring guard down here. Only trouble is I shoot left-handed, and I got a bow. Yay.
But the more interesting
More-
thing
yeah.
with this noble samurai sword that an officer must have owned, and that's really...
No, I'm not going to draw it all the way out, but there you are. An instant headache.
This is one of the real heirlooms
Yep.
that I'll never part with.
Have you ever been asked by the Japanese consulate if you want to return this? No, seriously. A lot of these.
Yeah?
If you take the hat off here, you can see who the maker was, and it may have a family history,
Yeah.
a name. We've
No,
done that.
I did take it off, and I noted it and checked on it, but I did that to see, what its value was. At any rate, so heading back after my duty in Korea, verifying the mines were swept, they finally decided to send us home. And that's where I had the other engineering challenge I mentioned. We finally made it to Astoria, Oregon, and that was a stop on the way to our ultimate destination, which was a little naval base at Tacoma, Washington, which wasn't far
Birmingham.
from Astoria. What?
Birmingham, Washington?
It wasn't far from there.
Okay.
At any rate, back to Seabees, turns out, and I'll never forget him, and he was very interested in me and trying to encourage me to stay in the Navy instead of, mustering out and going to college. He was Commander Jensen. He was a Seabee, civil engineer, and he knew I was interested in engineering. I was the transportation officer at this base, where we were going to mothball these LCSs, and that's where they mothballed them. So I was transportation officer and a few other duties, and he was trying to talk me into staying in the Navy and let the Navy put me through engineering school. I thought about it seriously, but I decided to muster out and
Live the
see
big
if I
life.
can
Yeah.
survive the civilian.
Now, how was your reception when you came back home, when you hit the States?
Well, in those days, I'm glad you mentioned that. What hurt me more than anything else about Vietnam was the stupid civilians, including people I knew, blaming the servicemen for whatever happened over there. They were there doing their duty. Why do you blame them and why do you give them a hard time? At any rate, I contributed to that war too. As I said, I've been part of the military-industrial complex to this day. Of course, GE is paying my retirement and funding my Porsche habit.
Oh, high-class Ford, huh?
And so I have to thank the military-industrial complex for that. But back to Vietnam. During Vietnam, I was designing jet engines that were used in Vietnam, of course, especially the helicopters. And as part of that job, my boss, who was VP of engineering at GE, he was a German, happened to be a German Jew, Gerhard Neumann. He personally went over to Vietnam. He didn't get VIP treatment. He went out to the forward bases, and he didn't talk to the officers. He talked to the mechanics on the line. See, our engines were used by Sikorsky, even though Sikorsky was part of United Technologies, Pratt & Whitney, who made engines to compete with ours. Ours was so good, even to this day, Sikorsky uses more GE engines. About 90% of their aircraft are powered by GE. At any rate, my boss, Gerhard Neumann, would talk to the mechanics, find out what they didn't like, come
and then
back,
bring it back home, yeah.
and beat me over the head. I was then in charge of designing the helicopter engines, and he told me everything that was wrong and gave me a deadline to make sure they were fixed quickly. So when he went back there, he wouldn't be hearing the same complaint. So we contributed to Vietnam also, but I'll never forget the lousy treatment the Vietnam veterans got, and that contributed, I guess, to some of the problems they had as civilians. I was lucky.
Amen. Now, we've got about 10 minutes left to go. I'd like to go a little bit further. Did you take advantage, if you will, of GI Bill, or had you gotten all of your studying done before that?
Oh, no. Everything I described was pre-college. I went to Kings Point, and it was all experience. I didn't have a degree. My ambition that would permit me to do what I ended up doing, designing jet engines, the highest technology engineering you can do next to, computers. I didn't get until I mustered out and went to CCNY. Working nights, plus the GI Bill plus working nights allowed me to support my family. Without the GI Bill, I couldn't have done it. But my advice to any young guy or anybody is there's no greater leg up that you can get than becoming part of the U.S. military services, but prepare yourself to take advantage of it, because they offer you
unlimited.
Multitude of what?
Yeah, it's unlimited what you can do.
That's right. So my advice is prepare before you join the service. You have to get an inkling as to what you like. If you don't have passion, you're not going to be the top of the line. You may get by, but you need passion. Don't do anything you don't have passion for. To work for a paycheck is the worst future you could have. You better find out what you have a passion for. And after I left GE, while I was with GE looking ahead, I don't like easy things. I became a mountaineer with the help of the GE support the clubs got and everything. And I climbed some pretty big mountains starting when I was 65. Anyway, take advantage of your opportunities and find a passion.
Yeah.
Without that, you're just like anybody
Make sure
else.
you have a goal first so you know what you're working for.
That's right, something you like to do. There has to be something, and it shouldn't be for a paycheck. The paycheck will happen if you're doing what you love.
There's a lot of guys that argue that right now today, but that's the other side of the coin. Now, How about your family?
What?
How about your family? Do you have any youngsters now that are...
Oh, yeah,
You hadn't talked about your son, but you've got great grandkids.
Yeah,
huh?
in fact, I have two right now, a boy and a girl. The boy, I'm going to make sure, and I'm funding it to the extent I can. I want him to be prepared for the real world like I was. Mine happened willy-nilly. His, because he's got all the benefits, I want him to appreciate what he's getting. And I want him to be able to rely on his own body, his own legs, and learn how to survive, and to appreciate all the civilized advantages and all the computers. But he better learn how to do arithmetic on the back of an envelope in case the computer
Yeah.
craps out, or in case your car craps out. By the way, I race cars and I do things with them, is have everything in your car, so if it breaks down like they did in Atlanta, you got everything in your car.
Everything but a sterno kit, I guess.
You got everything,
Yeah.
just like you're backpacking. You should be able to hike enough to carry your survival stuff on your back. And that's the test.
Yes,
so my
sir.
great-grandchild, he's doing karate right now. He just turned 6.
6?
After that, I'm going to get him in a kart program and see if he has the balls for being a race driver. I'm going to get him into karts. He doesn't have to become a race driver, but he's going to be a good driver.
Okay.
I'm going to get his appetite driving my Porsche when I go up there.
And if he doesn't want to, I'll try and help him. I'm that guy. Now, seriously, have you ever joined any outfits like the VFW? Have you ever joined any of the service outfits? The American Legion, VFW,
No,
Nam Betts?
I belong to the Jewish war veterans.
Okay.
Yeah, I support them, but I haven't been active in it. I'm too active in...
You're too busy doing other things.
Yeah, like after I retired, because I didn't get a leg up on skiing till I joined GE. That's when it's kind of late to learn skiing when you're 35. So when I retired and moved up to ski country, that's one of the reasons I moved from Marblehead, where I still have a condo, moved up to ski country and where I live now. And I became a ski instructor, and I took my skiing as far as I could take it, plus I climbed big mountains. Kilimanjaro and
Really?
20,000 footers in the Andes. I climbed Whitney. Anyway, just to stay...
Just to stay healthy and mean, huh?
I like exciting things.
Oh, great. This has been, believe it or not, one very fast hour. Whether you, they say we've spent just about an hour
We did.
getting
Boy, it
around
went
here now.
fast.
Did you have any more pictures you'd like to show real
Well,
quick?
Did you...
I've taken care of the ship and
showed
that.
the two
Yes.
there. I don't know. Yes. I
Anything
do.
that you want. This is your show, man.
Yeah. Here's.
They have to be a little bit bigger than this, though.
Well, yeah. They're kind of small. As I started to show you, I don't know if this would. This is me in that lifeboat drill I was telling you
No,
about.
that's too small.
That's too small. No, I guess I don't have any
Okay.
big larger than those two. You showed
What's that
those.
in your lap?
Well, those are prints.
Oh,
of
prints of the same thing.
you
Okay.
showed.
All right. Now, I'm going to ask you a favor.
Yes.
Since I've been up in New Hampshire, I've been trying to locate the JWV. They don't seem to have a place that I can contact to see if other fellows like yourself can come. So could I use you to do some recruiting for me?
Sure, but I don't think they have an office if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah. No, they don't. They only have an office. I'll communicate to you and tell you how to get in touch with them.
Okay.
Okay, but they don't have like the VA or the American Legion, different posts.
I know. That's the
They
problem.
don't have them up here. They might have them down.
Well, we had quite a few down in Massachusetts, and that's where I got a lot of the training.
Oh, for the Jewish war veterans?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they don't have anything up here.
Well, we'll keep looking and find if I can
Okay.
find you someplace.
If I hear of anything, I'll
Okay, now we
certainly
got
have
this on
a way
tape,
to
so you got to
contact
make good of it. I got you on tape, so you're going to have to make good on this, okay?
Yes.
All I can
No,
say,
please stay in touch, and if I can help at all, but we're so blessed here. I don't think people appreciate it.
amen.
But everybody has different potential and
Yeah.
capabilities. But there's a place for everybody.
I know.
Even today, the big difference between the gap between the haves and have-nots, you can negotiate that if you get guidance and if you have some,
Some chutzpah.
yeah. But yeah, chutzpah, but also it goes back to family. My family were uneducated. They couldn't speak or write English very well. They learned later on, but still they imparted to me patriotism, appreciating what you
And
get.
be prepared.
Don't waste anything. People are starving back home, and our relatives were having a tough time back. So my mother never forgot and was always grateful to be an American.
Amen. Press the flesh, my boy.
What's that?
I say press the flesh, and we thank you for
Okay,
your service.
thank you very much
We'll get
for the
together.
opportunity.
Okay? Well, that's a wrap, folks. It's been another story of what some guy did, and more important, how he suggested, and I suggest to you too. Get yourself a target, and then you can work towards it. But if you're shotgunning, it's no good.
Yes.
Have them rifle shots. Before we leave, one more time. For those of you who may need help, any guy or gal, in any situation, remember this number. It's a universal number in the States, 211, and then listen to what they tell you at the other end. Bob Stevens saying thank you for listening and hope that this has been something you'll know and appreciate. But more important, if you have a story to tell, please check the address coming in the back of you. We're here to help you. We need you. And we want to do a good job. Thank you. Stay healthy.